She was supposed to be celebrating. That's what makes it all the more heartbreaking. In May 2005, Natalee Holloway, an 18-year-old honors student from Mountain Brook, Alabama, boarded a plane to Aruba for her high school graduation trip. She had her whole life ahead of her, college plans, dreams, and a bright, contagious smile that would soon be broadcast on every screen in America. But 5 days into the trip, Natalee vanished. She was last seen leaving a nightclub called Carlosen. Charlie's with a young Dutch man named Joran van der Sloot and 2 of his friends. That moment, her stepping into a car with strangers, was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. And it was the beginning of a nightmare that would torment her family and grip the world for nearly 2 decades. Her mother, Beth Holloway, arrived in Aruba within 24 hours of learning her daughter was missing. What she found was chaos, a disjointed investigation, a lack of urgency, and few leads. The island paradise quickly turned into a place of heartbreak and suspicion. The case became an instant media sensation. Photos of Natalee in her graduation cap and swimsuit were everywhere. Networks looped her name day and night, trying to piece together what happened on that fateful night. Yet behind the headlines was a family drowning in anguish. Beth went on television begging for help, clinging to the hope that Natalee was alive, perhaps kidnapped, perhaps hiding. Meanwhile, Natalee's father, Dave Holloway, began organizing searches and hiring private investigators. The parents, though separated, were united in their fight to find their daughter. But days turned into weeks, and hope started to dim. No body, no crime scene, no closure, just the agony of not knowing. And as media frenzy escalated, one face began to stand out amid the confusion. Joran van der Sloot. He was the last person seen with Natalee. His name was on everyone's lips. His story, changing, inconsistent, raised eyebrows immediately. From the very beginning, something about him didn't feel right. And deep down, many feared he held the answer to the question that would haunt everyone for years. What really happened to Natalee Holloway? From the moment his name surfaced, Joran van der Sloot became the embodiment of suspicion. Tall, charming, and just 17 years old at the time, Joran was a Dutch honors student living in Aruba. On the surface, he looked like any other teenager. But beneath that facade was a web of lies that began to unravel almost immediately. Initially, Joran told police he and his 2 friends dropped Natalee off at her hotel. But hotel security footage showed no sign of her returning that night. Under pressure, he changed his story, saying he left her alone on the beach. Then the versions kept shifting. One moment she was safe, the next she was confused or drunk. Each retelling was different, inconsistent, and increasingly disturbing. Authorities brought Joran and his friends, the Calpo brothers, in for questioning. But they were released again and again due to lack of concrete evidence. Frustration grew. Natalee's family believed from the start that Joran knew more than he was admitting, and his contradictory statements only deepened their conviction. Beth Holloway publicly accused him of involvement, calling him a sociopath and demanding he be held accountable. The tension between Natalee's grieving parents and the Aruban authorities became front-page news, with accusations of incompetence and corruption flying in both directions. Despite being under the global spotlight, Joran seemed unbothered. He gave interviews, sometimes calmly recounting the night's events, other times smirking through new versions of his story. He became a master manipulator, baiting the media, misleading investigators, and toying with the truth. The absence of a body made prosecution nearly impossible. Every time hope surged, after a new tip, a supposed confession, a search effort, it would come crashing down. Joran's words were a roller coaster that never led anywhere, only deeper into confusion and pain. What made it all worse was his demeanor. He didn't act like a devastated bystander. He acted like someone enjoying the attention. Even as the world watched with disbelief, he remained cocky, detached, almost entertained. And all the while, Natalee's family was living a nightmare, forced to watch the one man they believed held the key to their daughter's fate walk free, talk freely, and twist the narrative again and again. Was he guilty? Most believed yes. But in 2005, belief wasn't enough. The lies didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. In the years that followed Natalee Holloway's disappearance, Joran van der Sloot turned the case into his own twisted game. He made confession after confession, only to retract them later. One day, he claimed he knew where Natalee's body was. The next, he said he made it all up. He told stories to journalists, undercover operatives, even friends. Each time, the narrative changed. It was a tormenting cycle. For Natalee's parents, every new lead felt like hope, until it collapsed under Joran's manipulations. He was playing with their pain. In 2008, Dutch crime reporter Peter R. de Vries secretly filmed Joran admitting on hidden camera that Natalee had died in his presence and that he disposed of her body. The footage aired internationally. People thought it was finally the breakthrough. But again, Joran claimed he was lying, just saying what he needed to gain trust from someone he thought was a drug dealer. It was all an act, he said. Authorities couldn't do much. Without a body or solid evidence, the video wasn't enough, and Joran knew it. He began profiting off the case. In 2010, he contacted Beth Holloway through her lawyer, offering to reveal the location of Natalee's remains for $250,000. She wired him $25,000. He took the money and fed her a lie. The location he gave was bogus. There was nothing there. It was a new low, even for him. This was no longer just about a murder. It was about cruelty. Joran wasn't just hiding the truth. He was weaponizing it. Every time he spoke, he twisted the knife a little deeper. And then, as if to confirm just how dangerous he was, Joran did it again. That same year, in Peru, he murdered 21-year-old Stephanie Flores, exactly 5 years to the day after Natalee vanished. Her death proved what many feared, that Joran was not just a liar but a predator, calculated, remorseless. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 28 years in a Peruvian prison. But even behind bars, he remained a haunting presence in the Holloway story. The confessions kept coming. The retractions followed. And the Holloways? They were trapped in a loop of false hope and fresh heartbreak, again and again. It was a grotesque kind of limbo, and Joran was its architect. After nearly 2 decades of torment, the moment finally came. In October 2023, during a court appearance in Birmingham, Alabama, Joran van der Sloot stood before a judge, not for Natalee Holloway's murder, but for his 2010 extortion scheme. He had tried to sell false information about Natalee's body for $250,000. But as part of a plea deal in the extortion case, Joran did something he had never done before. He confessed. And this time, it wasn't another attention-seeking stunt. It was real. It was legally binding. It was horrifying. Joran admitted to killing Natalee Holloway on the night of May 30th, 2005. According to his confession, he and Natalee were alone on the beach. He made sexual advances, unwanted, aggressive. Natalee resisted. She said no. That's when he snapped. In a rage, he grabbed a cinder block and struck her in the head. She died instantly. He dragged her body to the ocean and pushed it into the waves, letting the tide carry away the evidence. Just like that, the mystery unraveled, not with a bang, but a cold, clinical admission. In the courtroom, Beth Holloway sat just feet away from her daughter's killer. She listened to the man who had haunted her for 18 years casually describe the brutal way he ended Natalee's life. There were no tears, no apology, just facts. Blunt, brutal facts. Beth later told reporters, "It's over. Joran van der Sloot is no longer a suspect. He is the killer." Her words carried weight. For so long, the truth had been a moving target. Now it was finally anchored. Horrific, but real. The confession was more than a legal formality. It was a moment of emotional release, a grim confirmation of what the Holloways had feared all along. But it wasn't a triumph. It didn't bring closure in the traditional sense. It just marked the end of an exhausting, agonizing chapter. Joran's confession offered no insight into remorse, no crack in his armor of arrogance. If anything, it revealed how deeply broken he was, capable of such cruelty and willing to torment a grieving family for nearly 20 years. And still, there was no sign of Natalee's body. No evidence recovered. The confession, as detailed and grotesque as it was, left one question hanging painfully in the air. Where is she now? Joran's admission provided a story, but not the full truth. The ocean, he claimed, took her. But for a family that had searched every shore, drained ponds, scoured satellite images, the ocean was just another cruel dead end. In a world that craves resolution, this wasn't justice wrapped in a bow. It was a puzzle with one piece missing forever. The prosecution acknowledged the emotional weight of the moment. They stated publicly that they believed the confession to be truthful, corroborated by years of circumstantial evidence and Joran's own twisted patterns. It aligned with what investigators had suspected all along, but until that moment, had never been able to prove. For the Holloway family, the moment was shattering, yet oddly stabilizing. It validated years of agony, years of being told they were chasing ghosts, years of doubt. Suddenly, all of it made sense, not because it was okay, but because it was finally acknowledged. And so, in that Alabama courtroom, under fluorescent lights, surrounded by strangers and reporters, Natalee Holloway's story was finally told in full, by the one person who had kept it buried for so long. Justice had spoken. But peace? That was still out of reach. For Natalee Holloway's family, the nightmare didn't just last for days or months. It dragged on for years. Every sunrise without answers was another wound. And every false hope reopened the pain. Beth Holloway became the public face of the fight for justice. From the moment she landed in Aruba, she was relentless. She appeared on news shows, confronted suspects, challenged authorities, and poured every ounce of energy into finding her daughter. But behind that fierce determination was a mother, barely, holding it together. Her grief was raw, but she refused to let it silence her. Dave Holloway, Natalee's father, took a different route. He focused on search efforts, bringing in experts, diving teams, and private investigators. He wrote a book detailing his own experience, highlighting what he believed to be failures in the investigation. Their approaches were different, but their goal was the same: find Natalee, bring her home, and hold the guilty accountable. Over the years, they were repeatedly let down by tips that led nowhere, by suspects who lied, and by systems that seemed more focused on optics than truth. They faced backlash, too. Some criticized Beth for being too vocal, too emotional, but what else could a grieving mother be? Others questioned the family's motives, accusing them of chasing publicity. The criticism was often cruel and deeply unfair. Then there was the emotional toll. Every confession from Joran van der Sloot brought a new wave of pain. Was this the truth this time? Should they believe it? Could they dare to? Each time, they were pulled back into the horror of not knowing. Each time, they relived their worst fears. The media frenzy didn't help. While it kept Natalee's name alive, it also turned her story into a spectacle. The Holloways had to grieve under a spotlight, with every emotion broadcast and every decision judged. Yet through it all, they never gave up. Their fight wasn't just for answers. It was for dignity, for Natalee's name, for the truth to be louder than the lies. Their endurance became the backbone of this case, and it's why, even now, we remember Natalee Holloway. Not just for how she died, but for how fiercely she was loved. Justice is supposed to bring peace. But in the Natalee Holloway case, justice came late and came bitter. When Joran van der Sloot finally confessed, many people breathed a sigh of relief. The truth had been confirmed. The suspicions were justified. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like something else entirely. Regret, sadness, frustration. Closure came, yes, but only after years of suffering that could have been prevented. What if authorities had acted faster? What if the initial investigation hadn't been so mishandled? What if Joran had confessed sooner? These are questions that can't be answered, but they linger, like scars that never quite heal. The missed opportunities, the botched interrogations, the early releases. They haunt the timeline like ghosts. For years, Natalee's parents were told they were chasing shadows. They were criticized for being relentless, for not letting go. And yet they were right. They always believed Joran did it. And he did. But what kind of justice is it when the killer gets to live for nearly 2 decades without accountability? When he continues to lie, manipulate, and only tells the truth as part of a deal? It's justice by technicality, not because the system worked, but because it finally caught up. And it came too late to save anyone else. Joran's confession didn't come from guilt, it came from leverage. He gave up the truth because it benefited him. That reality stings. It reminds us that justice isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just a transaction, a painful compromise, one that costs families their sanity, their faith, their years. Even now, with the confession made, there's no grave for Natalee, no place for her family to mourn, no body to bring home. And that absence casts a shadow over everything. It's hard to move on when there's nothing to hold on to. So yes, the truth is out. The case is closed. But it doesn't feel like a resolution. It feels like a delayed verdict in a trial where the victim was forgotten for too long. And while Joran sits in prison, the Holloways continue to live with a wound that justice couldn't quite close. Justice was served. But peace? Peace remains elusive. So where does that leave us? With a confession, a timeline, a name, and still 1,000 unanswered questions. The story of Natalee Holloway is one of the most tragic and haunting cases in modern history, not just because of the crime, but because of what followed. The deception, the heartbreak, the years lost to chasing half-truths. Her case became a symbol of how justice can be delayed, how systems can fail, and how pain can stretch across decades. Joran van der Sloot didn't just take a life, he stole peace from an entire family. And when he finally told the truth, it felt too little, too late. Yet despite all the darkness, Natalee's story is also one of enduring love. Her parents never gave up. Her name never faded. The world didn't forget. She became more than a headline. She became a face, a fight, a symbol of every family who's waited too long for justice. But even with the truth revealed, we're left with a void. Natalee's body has never been found. Her final resting place remains unknown. And that hurts. Because we all want a resting place. A place to mourn. A place to remember. Her absence is still a presence. Felt in every courtroom, in every documentary, in every tear Beth and Dave Holloway have shed. Instead, her legacy exists in stories, in movements, in foundations built in her honor. And maybe that's where we find meaning, not in the cold facts of her death, but in the love that refused to let her disappear without a voice. So what can we take away? We take away that justice, when delayed, is never complete. That truth matters, even when it arrives broken, and that behind every headline is a real person, a daughter, a friend, a soul taken too soon, a young woman who deserved more and whose story still echoes. And for anyone watching, wondering why this case still matters after all these years, maybe it's because some stories don't end with answers. Some stories end with awareness. with memory, with the promise to do better. And maybe that's the only form of peace we get. If Natalee's story moved you, share it. Keep it alive. Because stories like hers remind us why we keep asking hard questions and why justice, no matter how late, still matters. Subscribe for more.